Okay, so hi Ned. Could you just introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Ned. I'm a first year computer science and philosophy student, and I'm studying at Hartford.
Great. So starting off with your journey to Oxford, did you always know you wanted to apply for computer science and philosophy?
Ooh, so computer science or an engineering related degree in general, I'd always been interested in vaguely, but I only found the computer science and philosophy course quite late on, actually almost at the end of my lower sixth. And then researching the course, I decided that that was kind of the right fusion of the two for me. So the area for a while, but the specific course quite late on.
Yeah, so what was it specifically about philosophy that interested you?
I think I quite enjoy both the kind of, I guess, abstract or general philosophical considerations of, I don't know, God versus evil, metaphysical, logical proofs, that kind of thing. And logic intersects quite a lot with algorithmic design and analysis. But I'm also really interested in how ethics and AI intersect, or how potentially theories of consciousness might interact with AI. And so, first year, we do a variety of courses like courses on the ethics of both computers in general and AI specifically, um, as well as looking at the more hard computer science, I guess.
Yeah, so in the joint honours course, are there modules that only computer science and philosophy students do, which specifically link them?
Yeah, so we do much the same computer science modules as the regular CS students. We omit one or two, but we'll cover them in later years. It's a kind of work balancing thing. And then we take some philosophy modules, some of which are standard, but there's one I do in Trinity, which is called, I believe it's Turing and on Turing and computability. But that examines partially Turing's 1936 and 1950 work on Turing machines, kind of creating the idea of computing, but also the Turing test. We look at Searle's Chinese room, which is another thought experiment about machine thinking. And it really does bring the two together and kind of look at the intersection rather than looking at the two in isolation.
Cool. So if you kind of imagine a year 12 student who's always wanted to do computer science and is really good at coding and into it, would you advise that they just look into philosophy?
Yeah, I think if you're in that position, if you think I'm really, I've been doing a lot of computer science, I enjoy programming things, I think that's a really interesting area to me. I think have a look at some of the materials available online from the site about computer science. Start read. They've got a few excellent Simon Blackburn and other books of just kind of introductions to philosophical questions. Have a read through them and see if they spark interest. Because if that's something you feel like, oh, I'd be interested in looking into that, in maybe discussing that with other people, trying to see where my view fits in with established views, then computer science and philosophy could be a really interesting course.
And where could
Um,
they find those resources? Sorry, on the Computer Science
so
Oxford
the
website.
yeah the computer science website, cs.ox.ac.uk, I believe, has a lot of different resources, both on the computer science course, but also on the computer science and philosophy course specifically.
Great. So moving on to your time applying,
Hmm.
um, you have to take the MAT test for computer science. Is
Yes,
that right?
mathematics aptitude test, which is
So
in
what was
October.
yeah, what was that like?
It's an interesting one. I really enjoyed it because there's a total of 7 questions, of which you do a specific 5, depending on which particular maths or computer science degree you're looking at doing. And as a computer science student, you do the first two, which are fairly well, a set of multiple choice, and then one longer mathematical question. But then you also do 5, 6, and 7, and 6 and 7 especially move towards being either logic or more abstract computing questions. So I recall for my one, I had a question on um, one of those kind of mind games of everyone's wearing a different colored hat and they know these rules. Can they deduce things about the color of their own hat by looking at everyone else's? But then question 7 was, here's an 8 by 8 grid representing a cliff in a video game. Your character can only move to the right and up, and there are coins across the cliff. How do you find the most efficient way, or how do you gather the most coins on your way to the top right? And so they're very dissimilar, I think, to the standard computer science questions you might be used to from A level. So I'd have a look at the questions available on the CS. The CS site again has a page on the mat. But they're really interesting, and they kind of give you that freedom to explore genuine interactions of mathematical concepts and programming concepts beyond just the very abstract way we often do maths at A level.
Yeah. So after you've done the test, how did you think it went?
I came out and I remember being very unsure. I remember on the
For more information on Oxbridge colleges, subjects, and to get help with the application process, visit oxbridgeformula.co.uk. Click subscribe and ring the notification icon to be notified when we release new content.
one hand thinking that because the questions are all, especially the longer questions, are kind of designed for you to build up stage by stage and use the previous section's answer. And so I felt like I have a decent answer to the final section of this. So I assume I've gone roughly the right direction throughout. But there were a lot of places where I went, I don't know if that was valid. I don't know if I've just made 2 errors that have cancelled out. I came out quite unsure of myself, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think loads of people think it went terribly,
Yeah.
and then still get in. So yeah, you mentioned that it's very different to A level. Could you kind of clarify exactly why it's different?
I think there's less direct. In A level, you might expect to be given just like, here's a geometric series, or disguised slightly by describing it as a series of balls or something. Here's a geometric series, find the sum to infinity, things like that, kind of direct application of formulae. There is some of that in the mat. The multiple choice questions can be, quite often, are more traditional mathematics, just straight up. But the longer format questions encourage you to think in a more abstract way, or to consider specific interactions that you may not have considered before. So it requires slightly more lateral thinking, I think. You will have to apply the same mathematical knowledge, but the way you decide how and when to apply it is more complex.
Yeah, and for any kind of A-level students wanting to take the mat, the Oxbridge formula does offer lots of information and online video solutions, as well as summer courses on how to do that. So a link will be available in the description. So moving on to the interview, how did you find that? Obviously, lots of people imagine sitting in a room with an expert in computer science or philosophy could be quite intimidating, and they grill you with lots of questions. Did you find that?
I think I definitely, going in initially, there was that sense of, oh, I'm why am I answering these questions? But I found that once I kind of relaxed a little bit, if the tutors are very much there just to try and understand what you know and to try and see if they can teach you. An interview is actually generally seen as a kind of a microcosm of the tutorials you end up going through in your time at Oxford. And so I think if you just talk through your thought process and kind of say, well, I'm thinking about this, and you listen to them basically as though they're a much smarter peer of yours, they'll kind of give you suggestions on how to go through the question. They understand that you won't get it immediately. If you relax into it, it can become quite an enjoyable conversation about the problem in front of you. But no, definitely a bit of fear going into the first one.
Yeah. How many interviews did you have?
So I had 2 computer science and 1 philosophy at Hertford. And then, because computer science and philosophy specifically, generally a lot of people will apply to Hertford and then quite often be seconded out to other colleges. It happens for a lot of courses, but I think quite a lot for computer science and philosophy. I then had 1 further computer science interview and a further philosophy interview at Lady Margaret Hall, LMH. And it was interesting actually. I felt that the computer science had gone well at Hertford, but the philosophy had gone well at LMH. And so I was kind of going, could you combine the 2? Because I think overall I did okay.
And what was the kind of most challenging part of the interviews? Were there any questions or tasks you really struggled with?
In philosophy, actually, there was 1 question which was about, the question set out a definition of what it was to lie, a suggested definition, and then proposed a series of cases. And so I recall there was one which was, the definition was sort of saying something you know to be false. And the example was, I don't know whether my friend's coming to the party, but I assure the person who's hosting it that they are. And I had probably solidly 3 minutes of going back and forth with the tutor of them saying, he's not saying anything false, and me saying, or rather, he's not saying anything he knows to be true, and me saying, but he doesn't know it's false, until eventually I realized that was them trying to get me to adjust the definition. And kind of that was when it really clicked about being a discussion and a productive step forwards. For the computer science ones, there was a really embarrassing one where I just completely forgot a very fundamental formula. What's the sum of this? I don't know. But they were quite
Which
forgiving.
formula was that?
I think it was sum of a geometric series. We were kind of going through the questions. They went, "You haven't done anything yet," and I went, "I don't remember what it is." But they were very forgiving and gave me the formula, and then I finished that question. Yeah.
Yeah. So also another part of the application course is the personal statement. What type of things did you speak about? And do you have any tips for people who are thinking about writing one?
I'm trying to think what I put in mine. So it was a mix. I had some discussion of, you know, which subjects I was taking, why I considered them very interesting. I don't know whether, I think probably it was a good thing, not just focusing in on this is one of the subjects I'm taking at A level, which I think is relevant. Here's all the things I'm doing in addition to it. Also including, I did physics, which is not a huge, it's a mathematically rigorous subject, but it's not huge relevance to computer science and philosophy. But just kind of including things that showed that was an interest of mine. And so I was passionately, I went to Geneva and got to visit CERN, which was amazing. And showing that kind of extracurricular interest, even if it's not necessarily in the subject you're applying for a place like Oxford, or Oxbridge rather, where they want you to have a kind of a passion for what you're interested in and be quite a well-rounded person. I think that can really help, showing kind of diverse passions and showing that you pursue things that you're interested in.
Yeah, definitely. So obviously now moving on to actually coming to Oxford last October, what was your first impression? Were you expected to study computer science and philosophy?
So when I moved into college.
Yeah, so your kind of initial thoughts about the course and how it went in the first few weeks.
First couple of weeks, it was interesting because initially for the first term, the two halves are quite sharply divided. You do some very mathematical courses and a programming course, and then logic, which is somewhat set theory but not really, and general philosophy. And so for that first chunk, it kind of felt less like I was studying the two as a combined course and more that I was studying them as two discrete subjects at the same time, sort of thing. Over time, I think that faded, and especially with the courses that we covered in Hillary and then Trinity, that faded away and it felt more integrated. But initially, I did have a slight disconnect almost of the two subjects existing in parallel, which was an odd experience. I was enjoying the lectures a lot, though. There's some really fun lecturers. I hope they're still going because there's some really fun lecturers in.
Why are they fun? What makes them fun?
I think the one who always stands out to me is the guy who lectures for functional programming, and that's because he just so clearly loves the subject. He's a really active presence on stage. He'll be bouncing backwards and forwards and hooray when a particular algorithm comes through. And it's just, especially when teachers in secondary school, understand the content but perhaps aren't the most energetic about it. Having someone who so clearly is in love with their subject and loves teaching about it and bringing that knowledge forwards was really nice to have, especially because that was a 9 a.m. on Monday lecture. So
that definitely makes it easier.
Yes.
But you also have tutorials, of course, in philosophy and computer science. What was your first tutorial like, and how did you find that? Because it's quite a unique experience, I guess.
Yeah. So we had probably it would have been probability. So it's you complete the first week. No tutorials. You're just settling in,
Right.
and then sometime before your tutorial in second week, you'll complete a problem sheet, which is basically a kind of homework sheet of questions based on that first week of content. You submit it, your tutor will mark it, you meet up, small groups, and go through it. And initially, I think it's quite a scary experience, again, because you're going in, they've marked your questions. Realistically, you've got a lot wrong on the first time around. And you go in and you get this sheet back with a ton of corrections and all the little intricate notes to make. Over time, though, I've come to really enjoy them, because partially because you get more used to the content, but also because you really get kind of used to and to know your tutors, and it becomes much more of a place you can go and say, hey, I didn't really get this. Can we go over this bit of content? Or I think I have a pretty decent grasp of this. I'm interested in how it interacts with that, maybe. And so once you've got the pattern down and you're managing to get everything in on time, and you're attending all your tutes all fine, they become actually, again, just sort of interesting chats with people, and at the same time bolstering your knowledge of whichever subject or whichever course you're having the tutorial in.
Yeah. Do you find that the tutorial experience depends a lot on who your tutor is, and that they often have very different styles?
Yes, definitely. I'm sort of thinking we have one tutor who's quite a fan of, so for one of the programming courses, a tutor who's quite a fan of kind of discussing the algorithm comparatively in the abstract, or saying, we're looking at two loops, one of which will iterate through the matrix and the other of which will actually deal with filling in the cell of the matrix. And then we'll come to the solution comparatively far at the end, just like, oh, here's how to actually implement that kind of thing. And then another tutor who would go much more straight in from the start into the code base and how it would be done. And some of them like to look more at further ramifications. Some of them much prefer to kind of make sure you've understood the rubric of the question, exactly what's being asked and how. And so you end up in this situation where your tutorial experience varies from tutor to tutor, but I think each brings its own different flair.
Yeah, great. And so now you're obviously settled into Oxford, completed your first year, and like everybody, passed. What was your typical day like? What's the kind of day-to-day grind, and what sort of work are you doing?
So I think I'm trying to sort of average, because we had a very front-loaded first term in terms of lectures, and then comparatively few as the year went on. So I'd say my average week probably was three or four lectures, and probably 2 or 3 tutorials. And so that meant that I was spending about 8 hours a week, so an hour or 2 every day in contact hours, either in one or the other. Outside of that, I'd say I probably spent a couple of afternoons a week on the problem sheets. I will confess that quite often it was the afternoon immediately before they were due in. And I was doing, for computer science, you do practicals, which are kind of multi-week projects where you'll be assigned to create a program that does this, that, and the other. And so again, I would kind of work on those in bursts. Outside of that, in kind of more co-curricular life, I got into rowing, although we had quite bad flooding for a lot of the year and couldn't do too much rowing, sadly. I did some theatre tech, volunteering to do light and sound running for various shows around Oxford. And I was involved in the climbing society for a while, although with Trinity, having missed Trinity, which is where a lot of the good trips are, that one never quite came to fruition.
Yeah, Trinity kind of, the summer term, which we call Trinity, is kind of been wrecked by coronavirus, obviously.
Yeah.
But never mind. So you mentioned practicals in computer science. Is that practical work you do independently, or is it like a science practical where you're in a big room working together?
More kind of independently, yeah. So you'd be working. It's individualized work. You don't work in group with other students, but you'll have a 2-hour session assigned each week for each practical. And in that time, it's not compulsory. If you want to work at home, you can, but you can go into the department. There's an environment fully set up with the correct language and libraries if, for whatever reason, you can't install them on your own machine. And then there are demonstrators there who are, I think, DPhil students, but who understand the practical and who you can ask for help if you're getting stuck. So it's independently completed work in terms of marking, but there's definitely support provided if you're finding a particular chunk of it difficult. Yeah,
and actually a specific question here, because obviously for computer science, costs and everything to say you need a computer and you need your computer to be able to do certain things and you need certain programs. Is that available to you if you don't have it, if perhaps you can't afford it?
I'm trying to think. So I know that the practicals, definitely. The practicals are to some extent intended to be completed on the lab machines. For week by week work, you need so you'll need some way of submitting work. If you have a computer that is, can just run Word or Notepad, you could write it in there, or we end up writing our programs by hand in exams anyway, so you could handwrite your tutorials. I think if you're in that situation, it's probably best to go to the department machines or access them, access the department machines when you can, because trying to complete scripts without being able to compile them and check them can be problematic.
Okay.
But a lot of colleges, I know Hartford certainly has actually fairly generous lending policies to provide students with laptops or other technology if they need it to complete their course. So
Yeah, and there's always like financial grants if you're eligible for that as well. So yeah, obviously you've talked about kind of the things you do outside of your studies. You seem to do quite a few different activities. Was it quite difficult to combine that at times with the academic requirements of a relatively intensive course?
yeah, I think initially after sort of at Freshers Fair, I picked up taster sessions in anything I was interested in and had entirely too many, and had to dial that back because it was sort of getting used to the fairly intense workload of Oxford and the just getting used to having that much to do a week. It balances out in the end, I think, and once it's all come together, you'll find quite a nice rhythm. But I think, yeah, in the first couple of weeks, there's definitely a sense of trying to fit in all the academic work and not sure where you'll put in everything else. I know that we had it quite bad because we cover 11 courses over the course of the first year, and we do 6 of them in first term.
Right.
So it is very heavily front loaded
Yeah.
for us.
So did that actually get easier as you go through the year?
Yes, it goes on to the more kind of advanced or complex courses in theory, but just, I mean, even if you spend twice the amount of time on the courses in later terms, you've still got a bit more free time.
Yeah.
And I think that in general, a lot of courses like to kind of slightly turn it up for the first term, give you a sense of the workload, make sure you can handle it, and then ease it off. So if you get through first term, I think you'll be all right.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, I think that because they've got they want you to be able to do the advanced course, and sometimes that needs a lot of work at the start. I think in general, first year it actually comes to some people a bit harder than the second year because you need to get to a certain level.
Yeah,
And of course,
standardizing everyone's.
you have a kind of
Especially,
quite.
sorry, go ahead.
No, you go first.
I was just going to, it's CS especially, with all the different mathematical qualifications people can come in with, and some to no computing knowledge. There are a lot of courses, as you say, in first term, which are kind of standardizing everything, bringing everyone to the same level. And those are, on the one hand, if you feel like a particular lecture you're good with, then by all means, don't go to that lecture, work on something else, but keep abreast of what's going on. Because I had a terrible thing where I skipped about 2 weeks of them, and then looked at the lecture thing and realized that the one set of lectures I really wanted to attend from that series had come and gone already, and so I had to go through them all in notes. So keeping on top of what's happening when, definitely a skill to learn, I think.
So is it kind of the case that there might just be some lectures that you already know because you did it as part of a particular qualification?
Yeah, it tends to happen most in those. There's an introduction to maths course that we do, which is a kind of standardizing maths knowledge one, and it happens sometimes. I think I would encourage everyone on your main courses, kind of the courses intended for your degree, even if you're fairly sure you know the content, and unless you are certain that you know it inside out, I would say still go to the lectures, check through the notes. Because if nothing else, there may be different notations. You might learn more. You can reaffirm knowledge from a few years ago.
Yeah. So one of the specific challenges of your course, I guess, is going from doing computer science problem sheets, written mathematical, to writing essays and reading philosophy. Yeah, I think that's quite unique. There's not many courses like that. Could you kind of describe your experience of doing science and humanities?
It's definitely an interesting one, because as you say, you kind of switch between them. It can sometimes be quite nice to kind of get to the end of a long probability sheet and say, I just do not want to look at any more algebra, and be able to go and do some philosophy reading and kind of shift your brain into a different gear. But conversely, sometimes you are stuck in one mode, and you just can't figure out how to go across. Um, I think for me, what helped a lot was having a consistent sort of timetable with when I was doing problem sheets, because mentally that meant I went, oh, today's a computer science day, today's a philosophy afternoon. Um, I think it's once you get into the course, once you get kind of deeper into the course, it becomes a really interesting balance, and you kind of go between the two. And a lot of the courses, we've been looking at courses to do in second year, and a lot of the second year courses really blur that divide, and it's kind of computers in society and in social science applications. But it does take some getting used to.
Yeah, so for the kind of, I mean, you don't necessarily need to have studied philosophy before to do it as part of the degree, do you?
Yeah. No,
But
I had never formally studied philosophy before I came to Oxford.
yeah, and do you think it'd be useful to have any kind of background in essay writing as part of an A level or IB or whatever qualification,
I
or
think
would it be the type of thing you can learn?
Being happy with essay writing, I think, helps. I was an IB student, so I had TOK partially, which is a kind of very minimized version of philosophy, but also history and English and sort of subjects keeping me in essay writing practice. I think if you come having not done essays in a while, it's not a huge problem. You can definitely learn. But being used to writing longer form things, kind of structuring your thoughts out, becomes very important as you go on in philosophy and you're writing these longer comparative essays.
Yeah, and so thinking about both parts of the course, what are your favorite modules that you've done so far?
Ooh. Um, I think the Turing course is probably absolutely my favorite, partially because it really is the stuff that clued me into being interested in this intersection and now studying it much more in depth with someone who's incredibly expert in it. So that I've enjoyed a huge amount. I've also really enjoyed the functional programming module. So CS people are already, CS applicants almost certainly aware of it already, but programming broadly comes in two flavors of imperative, which are programs that loop around and do things and return values, and functional, which basically is just applying functions onto data and returning data, and they have much less internal structure. And I had done very little functional before coming. And I spent the first couple of weeks of the functional course going, if only I had a while loop, and being really annoyed that I couldn't get back out to this stuff I was familiar with. But now going back to the imperative programming courses, I realized that functional's given me a whole new library of extra skills and extra things I can do. So functional, probably my second favorite module and definitely my favorite CS module, and Turing my favorite module overall.
Great. So one last question.
Mm-hmm.
If you had to kind of recommend any books or particularly interesting topics that people might want to do to kind of dip into philosophy, would you have any recommendations?
I'm trying to think, is it on my shelf? No, I think it's in the box of books I still haven't unpacked from Oxford. There's a book I believe called Think by Simon Blackburn, and another one by him called The Philosophy Gym. And Think is a slightly longer form consideration, and Philosophy Gym is a series of kind of 5-page considerations of classic ethical dilemmas or philosophical questions, quite often done in a kind of conversational style between two theoretical people. And those are really good for getting a handle on different concepts, seeing if you find those questions interesting, that kind of thing. As a personal recommendation, To Be a Machine by Mark Connell, which is less about the more traditional computer, or less about traditional computer science, but looks quite a lot at the transhumanists and people who want to augment their bodies or potentially upload their minds. And that one, I think, it's something to look at if you already think you're interested in the philosophical areas, because it's really interesting seeing someone sort of coming to this technology and these ideals entirely new, and examining what do they mean for him, how does that impact his understanding of what it means to be a person.
Great. So I think we'll finish there. But thanks so much, Ned, for telling us about your experience.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity.
From at all. Okay, cheers.